So, J. Ruud, what lovable book are we talking about today?
Well, Stacey Margaret Jones, I'll give you a hint. Huey P. Long.
Well, I know who that is, but I don't. Is it Confederacy of Dunces?
No!
Welcome to Between the Covers, where J. Ruud and I, Stacey Margaret Jones, both authors, talk about the carefully cultivated list of J. Ruud's 100 most lovable novels in the English language. And today I'm trying to guess what novel we're talking about. I had a hint and I don't know it. So have I read this book?
I don't know.
Oh, okay.
It is possible that you haven't.
I think I might know. My little mental archivist is screaming somewhere from the stacks, but I can't hear him. So let's try again. Hint number 2, please.
Hint number 2, Burden's Landing.
Oof. Nope.
And hint number 3, Willie Stark.
Is it Sinclair Lewis?
No!
What novel is it?
The novel is All the King's Men by Robert Penn Warren.
Oh, okay. I don't think I have read this. Is there a movie?
Yes.
Okay.
Actually, there have been 2 movies.
Okay.
One incredibly successful 1949 movie, which was Best Picture of the Year, with Broderick Crawford as Willie Stark.
Sure.
And there was a later movie that was made in 2006 that tried to be much more
I think
faithful
I saw
to
that
the
movie.
Yeah, much more faithful to the actual novel than the earlier movie was. And Sean Penn was in it playing
I saw
Willie
that movie.
Stark.
Okay.
But it was much less successful.
All right. Well, as I said, your list is carefully cultivated, which means that you compiled a number of lists of respected and prize-winning and critically acclaimed novels. And then you looked at the list and started reading novels on them that you hadn't read to compile your own list. What other list this book? Who else loves this book or thinks highly of this book?
Well, it's been a kind of classic of American literature ever since its publication in 1946. It received the Pulitzer Prize in 1947, making Warren the only writer who's ever received a Pulitzer Prize in both fiction and poetry.
Oh, wow. Okay. Interesting.
And it continues to be respected even now, almost 80 years after his publication. It was on Time Magazine's 2005 list of the best 100 novels since 1923. It was on the Guardian's best 100 novels of all time list. It was ranked as number 36 on the Modern Library's famous 1998 list of the greatest English language novels of the 20th century, as well as the Radcliffe Publishing's rival list of the same year, where it came in as number 38.
Okay.
The Library Journal made a list called Books of the Century in 1999 and ranked it as number 94. It was included on the American Scholars 2014 list of 100 best American novels, 1770 to 1985. Most recently, The Atlantic in 2024 came out with a list of the great American novels, which was an unranked list of 136 books, all chosen, according to the magazine, for their ability to challenge, delight, and leave readers more informed and engaged. And the novel's most elevated ranking was number 2 in the Oxford American's 2009 list of the best Southern novels of all time.
Sure. There you go.
So
All right.
lots of places.
Okay. Can you do it? Can you give us a down and dirty summary? Now, remember, we'll talk more about the novel, so you don't have to put everything in to the down and dirty summary.
Well, yes, but you understand that a lot of these novels are incredibly complex. This one,
right? We'll talk more about that.
660 pages of incredible complexity. But here is my Down and dirty summary.
I'm glad you've come prepared.
All the King's Men depicts the rise and fall of a corrupt populist politician, Willie Stark, showing how he is corrupted by power, and of the parallel rise and fall of the book's narrator, Jack Burton, who believes at first that he can be part of the Governor Stark's entourage without being corrupted himself. But he thinks that wrongly. And it is inspired by the career of Huey P. Long, the kind of populist and incredibly corrupt governor of Louisiana in the 1930s.
Right. Okay. All right. Well, if you see a dog or hear a dog walking around in here huffing and puffing, that is our rough collie, Gareth, who finished his treat bone and now is wondering what's going on. So as we've said before, if you are allergic to dogs on podcasts, you're going to start sneezing because they are here. All right. So I appreciate that, and I think you succeeded at your down and dirty summary. Because I asked that question because, honestly, sometimes you can hear about somebody rave about a book and say it's the best book they've ever read. They love the writing, they love the structure, they just couldn't put it down, changed their lives, and blew their minds. But if it's about something you don't want to read about, you're not going to want to read it, right? So I think the down and dirty summary is important because sometimes people just aren't interested in a topic, right? Yeah. So I appreciate that. But your list isn't called books you should read. It's called lovable novels, right? So why is this novel lovable?
Well,
it sounds like it's not about a lovable person.
It's not about a lovable person, but it is very satisfying in a way. I mean, it's a kind of a tragedy, and as a tragedy, it appeals as a tragedy. You've got a hero who's essentially better than most, but who becomes corrupted by power, even though he does a lot of good things, that the corruption ultimately brings him down in the end. And you've also got a character in the narrator, Jack Burton, who kind of amoral. He's an observer, and he philosophically comments on all these things that he sees and witnesses. Very much like the chorus in a tragedy that doesn't get involved in the action. But ultimately what happens is he has to get involved in the action. And he kind of moves from the choral figure of the tragedy into being another protagonist who has his own fall.
Right.
And
is the idea there also that you cannot stand outside of these situations with any kind of moral foundation?
I think that is the point, because ultimately Jack has to take responsibility for his part in things, even though he tries to live life kind of as an observer.
It's interesting to me because it reminds me of two separate, very different books. It reminds me of Lord of the Rings, where the people say they want the One Ring because they're going to do good with it.
Yeah.
Right? They want the power to make these things happen that they believe need to happen. And that the most mature and insightful people say nobody can have that. Nobody can withstand the pull of that kind of power, right? You think you're going to do good with it, it corrupts you, right? So that's one book. But it also made me think of The Great Gatsby, where, Gatsby has this desire because he's in love with Daisy, right? Which seems like the highest moral, except situationally it's not, because she is married, right? And then he has his friend who's narrating, Mick, who's watching and finds over time that he's complicit, or he's trying not to be complicit, but is he complicit, right? And it seems like it's a similar structure.
Yeah. I mean, obviously Warren would have known The Great Gatsby and read it, and maybe there was some kind of suggestion of that story in his head when he made this one.
Or maybe he, read it and wouldn't necessarily explicitly think about how could I do this in politics, but maybe there's an aspect of that kind of person that rings true, right? Mm. I'm gonna get involved with this, but I'm going to stay above it.
Yeah. It's interesting that you say it that way, because Warren himself said the book isn't about politics. People immediately saw this connection with Huey Long.
Sure.
I mean, Huey Long was known as the Kingfish, and his campaign slogan was "Every man a king." So,
which really meant Huey Long a king.
Well, yeah, it did
in the end.
So to call it "All the King's Men" kind of suggests Huey Long, and Warren said, well, Huey Long is not Willie Stark, and Willie Stark is not Huey Long. Willie Stark is just Willie Stark,
right?
For better or worse,
right?
And then he also said, and the book was never supposed to be about politics. It's supposed to be about other things, and the politics just is
the setting. It reminds me, as in my novel, there's a crime in my novel, but I was using the crime as a way to explore a marriage.
Yeah.
Right. So you need the right dynamics, the right kinds of conflicts and barriers to elicit these things from your characters.
Yeah. And I think that's what he means. He says, the novel was never intended to be a book about politics. Politics merely provided the framework story in which the deeper concerns, whatever their final significance, might work themselves out. So it's really about the deeper concerns, which have to do with corruption, with power, with trying to be above the fray, with loyalty. There's a lot of themes that go through the book.
And it sounds like, in politics, you can talk about the corruption of the system, right? Yeah. Like you have to pay this governmental official to get your permit to do this, right? It's corrupt. But this sounds like he's using politics to talk about the corruption of the individual mind or the individual moral system.
Yeah.
I haven't read the book.
Well, Willie Stark starts out as a well-meaning minor public official. He's like the town treasurer. And he's married to this teacher, this school teacher, Lucy, who he kind of idolizes. And she gives him this kind of drive to do something good. Well, he's got a chance to, and he's trying to get a new schoolhouse built in the town. And this is when Jack Burden meets him. Jack Burden is a reporter who goes to see what this guy's about, and this kind of furor that's going on over building the schoolhouse, and he just thinks of him as kind of a yokel, but kind of an honest yokel. But Willie becomes a little bit notorious when he's in a fight over who's going to build the schoolhouse, and the mayor and sheriff and people in power in the town want to make sure that that there are no black people working on it. This is a town in Louisiana in the 1920s,
right.
late 1920s. And so they want the contract to go to this guy who's really part of the kind of corrupt political machine. And it goes to that guy instead of the firm that Willie wanted it to go to. The fire escape is put in badly. It falls. Children are killed. And so Willie has this kind of victory as the guy who was honest and the guy who wanted things done right, and against the machine that screwed the whole thing up. So the governor is running for re-election, and he's opposed by somebody he's kind of afraid is going to beat him. But he also knows that if Willie, the kind of new hero in the state, runs for governor, he's going to take away votes from this opponent. So
he'll split the opposition.
So he'll split the opposition, and the governor will win re-election. There's a group of people that work for the governor that Willie doesn't really know that they do, talk him into running for governor.
Right. And
he runs a terrible campaign because he doesn't know how to talk, he doesn't know how to give speeches. He gives all these speeches where he describes these things specifically. He gives all the facts and figures, and here's this adds up to this, and nobody listens to it. And of course, Willie loses by a landslide, but he split the vote enough that the governor wins.
Say he kind of
realizes it's hinted to him that he was a patsy. Mm-hmm. In fact, Jack tells him pretty much that, and also tells him, here's why you lost, basically. Just tell him you're going to soak the fat boys and forget the rest of the tax stuff. Willie, make them cry, make them laugh, make them mad, even mad at you. Stir them up and they'll love it and come back for more. But for heaven's sake, don't try to improve their minds. And that's one major lesson that he learns.
People don't want to be better.
And then they don't want to learn anything.
Right.
They want to be stirred up. They want to vote because they're mad.
And they want to be told they're right.
And yes, that too.
Right.
And then the second thing he learns from running that way is the Machiavellian manipulation in politics is going to beat honesty and rationality every time, especially if it's backed by money. And so the next time he runs, he puts those learned things into practice.
He's internalized that.
Yeah.
He unlike the greater voting public, learned something.
Yes.
Well, what's the line? There's nothing new under the sun.
No.
So this book seems like it is still relevant today.
That's the thing.
When you're talking about populist politics,
yep,
it's the same moves, right? You get that sense that people think that they're inventing a new playbook, and it's the same playbook.
Yeah.
So why might some people not enjoy this book? Why might some people find it not lovable or not a lovable experience reading a book?
Well, it does have some prejudices that you would expect, not necessarily not from the writer, but from the characters, living in the Jim Crow South. Mm-hmm. And so there's some language.
Yeah.
There's a number of N-words in here.
Yeah.
One of the things in the book is a kind of class warfare almost. Jack comes from old money. And he's lived at Burden's Landing, mm-hmm. Where generations of his family have lived. His best friends growing up were the two children of former governor, mm-hmm. Governor Stanton. So Adam and Ann Stanton are his best friends growing up. In fact, he's basically in love with Ann Stanton. Mm-hmm. Proposed to her, and she turned him down, and then he married somebody else and divorced her before the novel ever begins. Mm-hmm. And then there's a Judge Irwin who is kind of a father figure to him mm-hmm. when he's growing up, and he's this strict, honest character, and all of them hate Willie Stark. You can't understand why Jack wants to work for him, because he's basically a redneck from the sticks. Mm-hmm. And they don't, they think he's not honest. So, I mean,
people may not be interested in that.
They may not like the implications.
Okay.
It's a disturbing book because of what Jack ultimately has to do. Because
no spoilers.
I'm not going to give you all the spoilers. I'm going to give you what changes him, because at one point, Judge Irwin, his kind of father figure when he was young, opposes Willie Stark's nomination. Mm-hmm. He's nominated a candidate that the judge opposes, and Willie tells Jack, I want you to go find something on this guy. Now, Jack's a researcher. He actually was a Ph.D. candidate in history and was writing a dissertation about an ancestor of his during the Civil War. And he decided he could not understand the motivations of this guy. He couldn't understand also the guy made one kind of fatal mistake in his life, and the ramifications of that spread all over to a lot of other people. And he didn't like that. He didn't want to understand it, and he just quit. He stopped working on his PhD and went and worked as a newspaper man. But anyway, he agrees to try to find something on the judge, and he does. I'm not going to tell you what it is.
Thank you.
But that disturbs him a lot. And also Anne, this woman that he has loved, makes what he thinks and what most readers will probably think is a really bad decision. And he kind of is just, so these two people that he's held up as kind of ideals are just destroyed in his mind. Everybody is a Willie Stark, it seems. And he goes through a kind of dark night of the soul. He travels to California, and he decides in his traveling that
are we still talking about why people might not like this book? I've really lost the thread here.
Yes, because what he decides is this kind of new nihilism. All the words we speak meant nothing, he declares, and all life is but the dark heave of blood and the twitch of nerve. We're all determined. We have no free will of our own. Everybody just an animal, and our high moral ideals are just words, and our actions are futile. And that's how he feels until very close to the end of the book. And so that might be a disturbing philosophy for some people.
So, but you're not, when you said he has a change of heart, so that's not necessarily Warren's view.
No.
It's not the view Warren wants you to come to.
No.
Okay.
I think it's the view Warren doesn't want you to come to.
So if you spend a lot of time with that, you may not enjoy it since it is long. When did the book come out? I know it's about a 1930s politician.
1946.
Okay.
So right after the war.
Oh, okay. When we had some, the deaths of toxic populists in Europe.
Well, yes.
Hitler, Mussolini.
Yeah. And Huey Long had actually died in 1935.
Okay.
Huey Long was assassinated.
Yeah.
In the Louisiana State House.
Yeah. I did know that.
So, I mean, that was really the spark that began the book, I think, probably. But by the time the war is over, there are other things to think about, I guess.
Yeah. Interesting. All right. Well, what number is this ranked on your list? That we are building the list week to week, listeners. So
as we speak,
Jay does not have the 100 books ranked, right? We are building the list week to week. So because he did not rank them, and I said, this is unsatisfactory. We need a ranking. So he's doing it against his will, but here we are.
I'm going to put this right after Farewell to Arms and right before The Things They Carried.
What rank
which means
is?
It would be number 18.
Okay, so A Farewell to Arms is 17.
Yeah.
All the King's Men is number 18.
Yes.
And The Things They Carried is number 19 now.
That is correct as of this moment.
All right. Well, very interesting. I mean, this sounds like definitely a cogent book right now, but also might be a little too much for you right now. Depends upon how you're doing with your mental health and the news. But
yeah. Well, yes, but also it's not a book about politics, really. The specific things that Willie does are kind of nebulous. You don't really know all of them, except when he's trying to get this stuff on Judge Irwin in order to blackmail him, basically. but you see the breakup of relationships because of the desire for power, kind of.
Right.
And that's really more what the book is about.
Right. Which, I mean, that's a lot of people's stories, is the power over others. Where does your self-actualization stop when it comes to what other people are able to do, right? And the decisions other people are able to make for their own lives. Yeah. That's interesting. I guess I wouldn't have thought about it that way. So it would be an interesting way to approach the book, thinking it's not a political book. It uses politics to examine human psyche.
And it also, the other thing I think that is really stressed in the book is responsibility. The necessity to take responsibility, to take action, and to take responsibility for the action. Because Jack, the last sentence in the novel is, I think, a key to what the novel means. He says, "Soon now," as Jack is always talking, "soon now we shall go out of the house and go into the convulsion of the world, out of history into history, and the awful responsibility of time."
That is interesting because, I mean, I think that happens interpersonally. I do feel like it happens politically, but it's people who are doing politics, right?
Yeah.
And what happens a lot, I think one of the most toxic aspects, the most harmful aspects of politics and political action is authority with no responsibility.
Yeah.
I have an authority to cut your budget. I'm not responsible for the people who are harmed by this. I feel no responsibility, and nobody's going to hold me responsible, right? And that is so dangerous.
And actually, it's probably my predecessor's fault.
I mean, you can blame anybody, but people who don't own the results of their actions, and that you don't need politics for that.
No, you don't.
That occurs all the time. But politics is a good way to examine it, I guess. All right. Thank you.
And now I guess it's probably time for Chaos Reader.
Yes. So I just finished this book, Treepass Poems by Brandon Sohm. It was the Pulitzer Prize winner for, I believe, 2024. I usually will order the poetry collection by the Pulitzer Prize winner every year because it's a good way to stay involved with current poetry writers and to see what's happening and what's valued and prize winning, right? And they called it a kind of como se dice poetics, which I don't know
what that means.
I'm not a Spanish speaker, but I believe como se dice means how do you say? How do you say, bathroom? El baño. So Sohm is descended from Chinese and Hispanic heritage in America. And these cultures come together in him, and he kind of examines the languages of each, and kind of family memories. I think some reviews I read talked about how it was kind of a game of telephone, and he was the connector. And so I thought it was very interesting to read from that point of view because, he's kind of always saying, how do you say, right? And in a way, I think poets are doing that a lot. And that goes back to Wallace Stevens' assertion that the poem is about the thing that doesn't exist without the poem, right? A poem draws a line around an experience or a phenomenon, and because it is bordered off, it now exists as something, right? And I think Stevens is very good at that, helping you conceptualize something that you hadn't thought of before you read the poem. And I think all of these poems are kind of in that line of his experience. As writers, when you're an observer of something and not inside it as much, you can get a lot of clarity in your description, right? And for him, he's kind of a thing and outside of a thing at the same time in terms of culture and heritage and language, which gives him a really good vantage point, I think. So I thought the poems were challenging because I am not inside of those things, but I think the best poetry does that. challenges you. And when you meet the challenge, you can be brought into something new and interesting. So I was really glad I read it. And it was also a finalist for the National Book Award, so for poetry. So it is beloved, and I'm glad I read it. So
we'll have to, once we get all 100 novels done, we'll have to do some poetry.
That'll really bring in the crowds.
I know.
But I do love poetry, as you know. All right. Well, we'd like to thank our continued technical support, Jerry Bruno, who is trying to teach us how to do this. We are slow learners. But he's been immense help in getting us started and helping us learn how to do it ourselves. We'd like to thank Sylvia for not barking her head off while we do the podcast, our dog, Sylvia. And also, we'd like to ask our listeners to do a couple of things for us. If you like the podcast, please rate and review it on Apple Podcasts. It's really, really helpful to get other people to see and to be aware of the podcast on the platforms. But also, just tell a book-loving friend about it and share it with them and see if they like it. So we'll see you next time. Between the covers.